What is your opinion on, I believe I'm using the correct term, dead naming? I think it's what it's called when you refer to a person's name that they no longer use and does not apply to them anymore. What?
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. So for me, it's a little bit different than most trans people's experiences because I don't have a dead name, right? Like it's impossible to dead name me. I kept the name Ben, because I kind of like the name Ben. I feel like it suits me. And so I never really had a like desire to like change my name. Um, but like there are a lot of people that do change their name, and really this is where like this is where my background in sociology comes in really, really handy because the reality is most cultures recognize a certain degree of sacredness in names and a certain degree of like personality within names. And every society kind of has its own different approach to names. But the ultimate reality is that the ability to define yourself is something that is critical and something that rests within a name, right? It is really just central to who you are as a person. It's the first thing people hear or see when they think about you as a person, right? They think of your name, right? It's meant to reflect you. So if you refuse to call somebody by their name, you are really denying them the agency to define themselves in a really sort of deeply personal way. And that I think is really, really critical and essential. So every trans person is going to have a little bit of a different, approach towards like their dead name. There are some people that will like this. So there are some trans women that will talk about when they used to be a boy or things like that. Like, and so that's not most, right? So just to be clear, but they're like, right. So everybody's got like their own unique experience with it. But the reality is like reflecting and understanding somebody's right to define themselves, right? So if for the most part, the general rule is to assume that it's never appropriate to dead name somebody, even if, right, even if you're talking about like, before they started transitioning or before they changed their name, um, really should be using their name because they didn't magically become a different person, right? They didn't magically become a different person the day that they transitioned. They just more publicly were allowed to be themselves. So the reality is with people who do have dead names, right? Even though I don't have one, if somebody says that their name is Catherine, right? That's always who they've been. They've always been Catherine. Just because people called Catherine by another name doesn't mean that she wasn't herself. And that really, I think, is something that is really important to understand because when you are dead naming somebody, you're basically claiming a certain authority over their existence that I don't think any of us rightfully have over anybody else's existence.
That is probably one of the best explanations I've actually heard. Um, I think can help people wrap their head around that, right? Like in a more compassionate, understanding way. Because I get like if you think about like not everybody likes the name their parents gave them, period. Right. Like, and so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
wouldn't like if they weren't transitioning and maybe they changed their names, you probably wouldn't dead name, that person. And so it is kind of, I like the idea of explaining it to people and like, this is this person's way of expressing and defining themselves. And, um, you should respect that.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely, 100%. And it's like, I mean, I could go on to like a whole longer tangent about how, like, because capitalism has sort of like soaked itself into not only the United States, but a lot of the rest of the world, a lot of sense of ceremony and sacredness, not necessarily like spiritual sacredness, but like cultural sacredness has kind of like been evaporated. Everything has kind of been either commodified or bureaucratized. And so in that, like, there's not a surface level understanding that most like Americans have about what it means to have a relationship with your name, and like how that reflects your identity. Um, and so that's just, I think, one of the unfortunate realities of the way that like our entire culture has been commodified so that people sort of miss that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very grateful that I studied like social sciences and my focus within social sciences was anthropology, because when you learn about other cultures and the way they view things like names, I think it allows you to create your own meaning and your own understanding of how and what things should mean.
I one time had somebody. I was trying to understand it fully because I always try to understand things fully. It ends up being, getting to pretty into the weeds quite a bit. And one of my really good friends said, I'll leave out some of the colorful descriptions that she used, but she said, imagine you're in prison and it's the worst prison and you were suffering and it was just demoralizing and you were always hiding and your prison number was, uh, 83572. And you spend 15 years there and you get out finally. And instead of someone calling you your name, someone that used to be in the prison is like, hey, it's 83572. It would feel like, no, that's not me no, you're wrong. That
Yeah.
was, and I thought that was another good way of describing it. And it made me really understand it.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that is like a really good way of explaining because like, I mean, especially when you're talking about trans people, right? Most trans people will tell you something along the lines of like, this is who I always was. I was just forced to pretend to be something else, right? And so, while it's not a physical prison, is a theoretical prison, like a cultural and societal prison of being forced to play a position in society that you don't recognize as truly yourself.